Migrating to Australia, it's the show where we examine people's journeys, pick apart visas. I slag off the government. David does his best to keep me under control. And frequently, Australia's friendliest, but prickliest. Today, he looks like the prickliest immigration lawyer in the country. Mr. David Bongiorno.
I had a beard trim, no shaves today, so that's why I am rather physically prickly. Grant, how are you? You good?
Pretty good. I think I had to say at the end of that we meet all sorts of really interesting people. I think I left a bit out.
We do. Well, we've got a very interesting young woman who's Vietnamese Aussie. She came from Ho Chi Minh City, studied in Australia, is a social worker, and her name is Vina Nguyen. V, thank you for joining us on the Migrating to Australia podcast.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Grant, for having me here today.
V, it's really exciting to have you because we haven't had anybody in the social scene, the social justice scene, and you've been a social worker.
Hang on.
He interrupts me.
You have a terrible memory. We have had a social worker.
Oh my gosh! We're in trouble. Who is it?
Mr. Fu. Mr. Fu.
Louis. I think of Louis as a musician. As he stumbles over his words, I think of Louis as not a social worker, a musical genius.
Sorry, Mr. Fu, for
Louis, I apologise.
Yeah, for totally downplaying and disregarding your professional expertise.
I think of V. Just so you know, Louis is a very cool dude we had on the podcast, but he's an exceptionally talented musician. So we tended to talk most of the podcast on his musical talent. He's been on ABC Rage, so he's actually very, very, very good. He's a good man too, out of Singapore.
And he's a card-carrying punk. He's a certified punk, no doubt about it.
The social welfare, social justice. I mean, is it something that you wanted to get involved in when you were in Vietnam as a young girl?
Yeah, so I actually have always been interested in I guess like social justice, and back then I was more interested in like humanitarian work. Was always picturing myself working for Red Cross of the UN. And an interesting fact that I don't think I've told you, David, that I came here and initially I was doing international studies in Canberra.
Okay.
And I moved from Canberra to Melbourne, and I've got two offers. One was Bachelor of Social Work, and the other one was Bachelor of Business and Marketing at La Trobe University. And I chose the business degree over the social work offer because at the time I thought that I would be going back to Vietnam, and I wouldn't be able to have a social work career in Vietnam.
Is that because social work is not highly regarded in Vietnam, or it's a field that's very, very small, as to mean non-existent?
To my understanding, it is almost a non-existent field in Vietnam. Well, it might be different now. I don't stay up to date with like the social work field in Vietnam and how it has been developing. But at the time when I was in Vietnam, I've never heard about social work in Vietnam.
What did Mum say? Because so you're young enough to ask. What did Mum say when you said, "Mum, I want to study social work"? Was she happy, cross?
Yeah, she was really happy because I did my business degree, and I just felt like I did it because I needed to have a backup if I go back to Vietnam and I need a career in Vietnam. And so she wasn't quite thrilled about the business degree, but she respected my choice anyway, and she wanted me to be a nurse, because she's a nurse. So when I told mom that I wanted to study social work, she's quite excited. She was quite excited for me.
David, I want to pick apart a bit the migration implications for business degrees and social work degrees at the moment.
Now, business is a pathway to nothing. A general business degree, nothing.
So I wanted to see when V was able to make these decisions and what kind of decisions she would maybe make if she was faced with that situation now of having to, choose an academic pathway in Australia. So can we start, V, with how long ago was that when you had to make your decision when you were studying international relations?
So I made the decision to leave business and start social work in 2017. So it was not long ago.
You've got a master's.
Master's, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, David, would someone who let's look at the two examples. If you had a Bachelor of Social Work today or a Master's in Social Work, where would that leave you in terms of a skilled migration pathway?
Well, I'll tell you what, Grant, V's a prime example of how wonderful a qualification social work is, because recently she was accepted by Victorian State Government, nominated, and V got her permanent residency by virtue of being a social worker, qualified, degree, master's level. Bachelor of Business that she had in the background is something for a backup, but social work was a vehicle for her to engage in Australia in something she loves, namely social work. So it's a very powerful way to migrate. It's a very powerful course. But with any course, as we always say, Grant, things change. But V, there's a lot of social upheaval as a consequence of COVID, and I don't see social work being taken off any lists or being given less ground and less exposure. How busy are you because of COVID?
It was quite busy, like over the past few days, especially after the announcement about lockdown came out. We just had to change everything, our policies around seeing clients face to face, checking in with clients, because we work with families and young children. So also having to talk to parents around strategies to keep the kids grounded, entertained, keep the family harmonious. So, and a lot of parents are anxious about changes, about being locked together in one place, especially those that have, 5, 7 kids in the same age. It's really, really difficult for parents and for families.
So you'd be dealing with many different cultures then, because I'm of Italian background. My auntie has 9 children, but they're all a lot older, and she's a lot older. People not having 5 and 7, Australian typically do not have 5 to 7 children. What are the backgrounds of some of the people you work with?
I have quite a diverse caseload. So I work with Anglo-Australian clients, or we call culturally and linguistically diverse clients, refugees, asylum seekers. I also have Aboriginal Australians on my caseload as well. So
you're working with people in terms of, it must be wonderful, the empathy you have, because you're a migrant, and would you be dealing with many first generation families?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, definitely.
Now, how many languages do you speak?
Just 2.
Just 2. It's more than most Australians, V. More than most Australians. Because of your Vietnamese language.
Hang on, V. I have to make a crappy joke here. So you speak English and Vietnamese. How do you
Yeah.
get on? How do you get on speaking Australian?
V's so polite. You're so polite, V. Laughing at that bad joke.
I mean, anyone could have seen that coming from 100 miles away. But
So, I mean, is that empathy? What are the skills social workers need? I mean, empathy. What else? Because you're going into people's homes,
Mm,
and you've got to respect their space, respect their cultural mores. What does a
yeah.
good social worker need?
Well, where to start? So a lot of empathy, understanding, non-judgment, and things like, parenting skills or knowledge about children, knowledge about families. Those are the things that you can learn on the job. And there's a lot of training there that agencies or companies would send you to. And there's a lot of sharing amongst colleagues as well. So those are the things that you can learn on the job. But I would definitely start with, like understanding empathy, good research skills as well. Because for me as a social worker, I always call myself a macro social worker rather than a micro social worker. So I really focus on systemic issues, things that have to do with um, funding, for example, or things from a more structural point of view. And I am able to see how that impacts families and children, or the client groups that I work with, um, more structurally, and from there I develop the empathy for them, the understanding for them, and it informed my practice with them, how I address the issues and how I frame the issues, and I do in the future wanted to work as an advocate, or policymaker. Um, that's
So
my
that would mean
that's
dealing with local and state government and federal government.
yeah.
Do we fund our social justice programs adequately?
No, I wouldn't say so.
was that a
Um,
trick question, David?
I just was. V's a wonderful, peaceful person who won't rock the boat. I might rock the boat on that. I think they're probably woefully underfunded, aren't they?
Mm, mm,
Yeah. And
definitely.
how could they do it better? I mean, where are the major deficiencies in funding? In what sectors of the social justice system?
I'll definitely say housing. Housing is the number one area of funding that definitely needs development. I work with a lot of clients who doesn't have the housing needs met, which is a really basic need. And without housing, we can't. It just seems like you can't go anywhere without housing, because there are um, things like mental health or drug and alcohol, and um, a lot of other social issues as well. And how do you address that without a secure housing, a place where people can feel like they belong?
It's a massive problem here, and
It is a massive
I, I
problem.
I don't know. I don't know how we solve it, because every time state or federal government seems to do a housing initiative, they generally try and make it two things. They try and say, we've got a job creation, or we're keeping jobs going by stimulating the housing sector, the construction sector. And in most cases, that's profit driven. And profit driven companies aren't interested in social housing.
No.
So we we get it wrong every time. I mean, this has been a problem since I was a kid. I mean, I can remember being interested in it when I was at high school and certainly at university. Now we're talking the 80s. This was on the radar. So there's no genuine will. There's no genuine will at the highest level of governments, any governments, to address this. All they do is make it look like we're going to address it. So how this is a question that's probably unanswerable, V, but how does someone in your position actually make a difference for, say, it's a family that are facing homelessness when the only resources available to them are maybe a 12-week placement in emergency housing? How do you get people to look past that really short horizon? Am I being too pessimistic? Are there options for people if they're forced into emergency housing?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good question, and I actually don't have a perfect answer to that. So in my line of work, in the program that I'm working in, we have something called goal-oriented plan. So we sit down with clients and we identify goals that they wanted to achieve, and the goals has to be realistic, achievable, measurable. And so with family with a lot of issues, including housing issues that can't be addressed in one day or two, and just for your knowledge, an application to the Ministry of Housing now takes 20 years to be processed. So that's something
years.
that so that's something that we can't put down in the goal plan, the action plan. We would have to break it down a little bit more. We have to focus on other things first and make it very, very, very simple, one day at a time.
People who've come, you're first generation Vietnamese Australian. You're dealing with a lot of first generation and second and third, of course. You've succeeded, and it must be very hard for you. It must be hard for anybody to do social work. And how do you deal with the strain, the pressure, the sadness? I was a criminal defence lawyer for many years, and the sadness and the stress made me very sad and very stressed. Social work, we used to joke we were social workers with law degrees. The only difference is we had a law degree, because we did a lot of hand holding, a lot of talking, a lot of counselling. How do you cope with the, because it's tremendously stressful, tremendously sad, but a very, very important job?
I think we'll just I just have to learn to sit with the unknown, with the anxiety, and also you need a really good team. You need a really supportive team and colleagues and manager as well. I think that's really important to me, at least. And that the people around you, the people in your team, need to really model the work-life balance. So my team, everyone is really good in terms of defining that line between work and life. We have unspoken rules, like if we sit down for lunch or if we go out for coffee in the morning, we don't talk about our clients. We don't talk about work. We never talk about cases. Once we take down our badge at the end of the day, it's like a symbol of end of working day, and we go home. And we often have like group supervision. We have an external supervisor that came in and discuss about strategies that we can use. So one of the strategies that I find really helpful is that you have a position description for your work and you have a position description for your home.
Can you elaborate on that? I like that. Tell me about we understand a position description for work. What's your position description for home? Tell us more.
So position description for home can be like you go home and you go for a walk. You committed 30 minutes focusing on yourself without having to worry about anything else. You cook nice meals for yourself or you go out to eat. Watch TV, choose a self-care activities, whereas it's reading a book or playing a game or
Listening
talking
to a
with friends.
podcast.
Listening to a podcast, yes. Yeah, so like a clear position description so that you know what you should expect when you
Now,
go home.
whenever we watch TV shows and they have a social worker, it's a bit like it's a bit like any character on TV, pretty much. They
Yeah.
leave the office and then the phone rings and it's their distraught client and they put everything else on hold and they rush out and they solve the problem in the middle of the night, probably taking the client or the customer or whatever off to a hospital because that's good for tally. Are you able to just clock off? Is that the way it works for you?
No, it's not. It's we know we've been we always said that we're not a crisis service, so we don't respond to crisis. And I personally, I always have my phone on no disturb from 5 p.m. to 8 a.m.
Very disciplined, V.
So
Well done.
that's really, and I know that there's some social work jobs that you are required to be on call. So that's a different story. If you're on call, they will have a procedure like what you need to follow if you're on call. If there's a crisis, what you need to do. But yeah, technically, if you're not a crisis service, then you're not expected to respond to crisis. And but this question comes up in every supervision. What do I need to do if 4 p.m. my client calls me with a crisis and I only have like 1 hour, and after that 1 hour it hasn't been resolved yet? And at the end of the day, again, like we'll just have to sit with the anxiety. We'll make referral to the crisis service that are able to address the issues with them after work hours. But yeah,
That's
the
very
end of the
disciplined.
role.
That's
very,
incredibly.
very disciplined.
I don't know
I think
if I
that's
could do.
very important, because if I'm not, if there's no discipline like that, I wouldn't be able to stay in the field.
Is there high burnout in the field because of its intensity? Is there, like nursing, there's high burnout in nursing, high burnout in social work?
Yeah, definitely. And I would imagine that is the intensity, the level of intensity is higher if you're in a more crisis setting like hospitals, for example. Because hospital social workers, what they do is they do discharge planning a lot. And when you discharge a client, you need to make sure that the client will be discharged to a safe environment. And lots of the time it's not possible because they go home to a perpetrator of domestic violence, or they don't have a safe and secured housing to return to. And the social worker's job is to advocate for them to stay in the hospital. But we all know that hospital beds are quite high demand and you can't stay there forever. So yeah, that's a lot of pressure on hospital social work, a field that I haven't been able to go to.
Is it something you're interested in pursuing as you develop as a social worker?
I'm not sure. I've never pictured myself working in hospital, but that might come up later. And yeah, and one thing about being in social work is you have probably hundreds of jobs to choose from. You can work in so many sectors, so many fields.
And V is like if you open the the equivalent of the newspaper, the want ads, talking old people language here. If you were to be looking for a social work position today, would you have a lot of options? Like, could you take a stab at there being, 100 positions nationwide open, 200,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
or 20?
Probably hundreds of positions. And I would say that there's a lot of social work jobs out there that doesn't have a social worker title. So that it can have a lot of very different titles, but they're all the social work jobs.
You did your masters in social work at La Trobe?
No, at Monash.
Oh, Monash, beg your pardon. And you did your bachelor's?
La
What did you
Trobe.
do? La Trobe, Bachelor of Business and Marketing, La Trobe, Masters of Social Work at Monash. Were there many of your many Vietnamese colleagues and friends with you in the Masters of Social Work, and have they stayed, or are you one of the few that stayed and stuck around and got permanent residency and 1 year from now getting citizenship?
I didn't come across a lot of that many Vietnamese students studying social work. And actually, quite interestingly, I was interviewed on the street by someone in Footscray who was a Vietnamese. And when I said that I'm Vietnamese and I'm a social worker, they were quite surprised because they said that there's not many Vietnamese in the field. Yeah, so definitely I probably came across like one Vietnamese in my field, in my course at Monash. But we had quite a diverse, diverse groups of students at Monash, the Master of Social Work course. We had a lot of Singaporeans, Chinese, Malaysians, people from South America, Europeans, and a bit of Australians.
Have you kept in touch, and have they pursued the same pathway as you and sought the 190 visa? Or how many of them have stuck around, or how many have gone home?
I know some people gone home because this is their second degree and they don't have the option to go for another 485, and which is the case for a lot of people. And I would have been in the same boat. But yeah, you know the story, David. So yeah, a lot of people had to go home just because they didn't have the option, the option to go for another 485. But the people that did have the options, I know they all got a social work jobs, and some of them have got the same 190, the same pathway that I did, and some of them are still in the process of applying and still waiting.
It's a very hard pathway. It's a very hard pathway, and you've done exceptionally well. Have you got hints or tips or tricks for anyone who's listening from Vietnam, or anybody listening anywhere, on post-study migration and what to do and what not to do? What are some of the traps you think people fall into when they're visa applicants?
I think there's a lot of I guess migration agents out there that paint a really nice pictures around, or like make it really easy to migrate to Australia. Why it's not? When I did my social work, a lot of people said that it's quite guaranteed that you do social work and get you would be able to get your permanent residency. And I can tell you, David, when I did in the 2 years that I did my social work, I worked really hard, not on my degree, but I also work on my IELTS. I worked on my CCL, the NATI test. I worked because I plan to be able to get my permanent residency straight after my student visa expires. I plan to get my invitation after that, and then COVID hit. So I've got all the requirements, and I think I've got the highest point that I could go for, which is 85.
Brilliant.
Straight after I finished my degree, which is like the highest that I could go, and COVID hit, and everything just shattered, and I'll have to, go for another option.
Now, V, you have got with 85 pretty much as high as you can go given your age. Tell me, with that, I'm doing maths in my head. That means you've got 8 in each band or 79 plus in each band.
I've got 8 each band in IELTS.
Academic or general?
General.
Lovely effort. People are terrified of IELTS. Grant and I use this podcast as a platform to tell people not to be scared of IELTS. Can you let people who are listening, can you tell them how you got 8? Because it's 8 in each band is a wonderful achievement. And if you and I and Grant took $100 out of the bank and said to the first Aussie, here's $100 if you can get 8 in each band, they wouldn't get it, would they?
Yeah, no. It's
no, because they'd go, oi, oi, oi.
It's a lot harder. It's a lot harder than people think.
No, yes, it is. It is a lot harder. And I used to work in customer service for IELTS, and I can't tell you how many complaints we got in a day from Aussies or from native speaker complain that they didn't get the IELTS, but they native speaker. And I was like, well, it's a game, and if you know the rules to the game and you play it well, then you win. But if not, then it's not a test to it's not a test of how well you speak English. It is, but it's more to it than just a test of your English language capabilities.
That's a great answer.
And I wouldn't say that IELTS is easy and it's not challenging, because I took IELTS like multiple times to get 8. Multiple times. I took it probably 5 or 6 times to be able to get 8, because I was so stubborn that I didn't switch to PTE because anyways, I was stubborn that I would get 8 in IELTS, and I did it again and again and again until I got
Brilliant.
it.
It's brilliant. You've also got the credential community language in Vietnamese. That's a very hard 5 points to get as well. It's also a very expensive 5 points because the test, how much is the test?
Was it $800? I can't remember.
It's not cheap, but can you give us a little bit of insight into the Vietnamese test, and people listening? It's not for everybody, credential community language, is it? It's not for everybody. It's very hard to do.
No, it's pretty hard. I don't know about other people, other Vietnamese speaker. Anyways, I have a different personalities when I speak Vietnamese and a different personality when I speak English. So it's pretty hard to switch between the two.
Now, V, can I stop you there, V? What do you mean?
I think differently in Vietnamese, and I think differently in English. I don't know how to explain that.
Does it mean that you're more, shall we say, serious and considered in English because you've got to really think and process, like, what does someone like me who's a native English speaker, what am I actually saying? Because native English speakers, especially Australians, speak quite differently to in our version of English than you would be speaking English to someone who was a native Chinese speaker who had learned English. So I just wonder, is it because you are being more deliberate, more considered when you have your English language brain turned on?
I think because I was brought up in Vietnam, but also was very influenced by like American media and grew up with a lot of American shows and then came here to study as well. So when I speak English, I think in English in my head, and when I speak Vietnamese, I think in Vietnamese. And also because I think me as a person was quite influenced. Like I changed a lot after I studied social work. I changed the way that I think, the way that I think about other people, and the way that I think about myself as well. So when I have, and also coincidentally, a lot of topics in CCL, the tests, are social topics, the topics that I would come across in my work as well, because there's a lot to do with like court, child protection, aged care, all of that. So I just feel like I'm wearing a social work hat when I did the test, and also because I did my Master of Social Work in English in an Australian setting, and in Vietnamese there's no equivalent of that in Vietnam. So often when I have to talk about those topics, or I have to talk about my work to my mom or my families, I'll have to translate, literally translate English to Vietnamese, and it doesn't come in Vietnamese. So have to like switch between the two a lot.
How long did it? You go, Grant.
I was just thinking how so many people in Australia don't understand the challenge of operating in a bilingual, or it's not really bilingual, it's duolingual, isn't it? Because you have to be culturally aware in the two languages, not just linguistically aware, which is a much bigger challenge than just being able to go on a tour and bumble your way through speaking someone else's language on a 10-day tour. You know, that being culturally aware in two languages, I think, is a far more difficult thing than being a casual speaker.
Your partner is an Indonesian Australian.
Yeah.
Are you learning Bahasa?
Yes, I do. I do wanted to learn Bahasa Indonesia.
Have you learned any yet? Because I want to try out my Indonesian phrase.
I haven't like learned much for the past few months, but I have.
Have you been to Indonesia?
No, I haven't.
Because you need to know this phrase if you go to Indonesia.
What's this one? What is it?
What is it?
Di mana kamar kecil?
I don't know what you just said.
What does that mean?
Di mana is where, kamar is room, kecil is small. Where's the toilet?
Oh, that's very important.
That's right. You have to know that if you're going to a restaurant, you're going somewhere. So that's
the
it.
Other good. The other good one. I'd be good V in Indonesia for one day, the 8th of August, the National Day, and I would say Selamat Hari Merdeka, Happy National Day. That's about all.
Yeah.
Now your Vietnamese language skills. I mean, do you have cause to use them on a daily basis in work?
I do have because my manager is very get conscious about me being Vietnamese, and they don't want it to assign me a case just because the client is Vietnamese, and they wanted to keep a diversity in my caseload. So I don't have that many Vietnamese clients, so I can't say that I use Vietnamese on a day-to-day basis. Probably apart from like speaking to my mom.
You just pop up to St Albans and help me do the shopping.
Yeah.
Right?
Back then when I worked in asylum seekers setting, I spoke Vietnamese more.
What do you miss? What do you miss from Vietnam that you could wish you bought here. What would you
food.
like to? Yeah.
The food.
Is anything close in Richmond, Collingwood, Footscray, St Albans? Is any of it close? Does it come close?
I wouldn't say. I always joke with my friends that it doesn't come close, probably because it doesn't have all the dust from the street and all the sweat from the people preparing the food. Um, yeah, but I can. I don't know if you tried 13, David. Um,
No.
yeah, so there's one in the city and there's one in Springvale. It's Northern Fur. It's
Yum.
not. Yeah, so it's Northern style. It's one of the first in Melbourne, I believe, and it's actually a restaurant in Hanoi, and the owner
Ah,
brought it here. It's
lovely.
amazing. I've never eat Northern style pho when I was in Vietnam, but I tried it and
More heat
I
to
had
it.
a
More heat to it.
the broth is clearer and has a lot of spring onions and herbs, and it has
Yum.
the Chinese donut to dip it with. I have a lot of friends from Hanoi, and they all said that it's very authentic. So you
Oh,
gotta
love
give
it.
it a try.
Grant, we'll have to go and give it a go because pho is the greatest dish on earth.
Well, David, I think I'll have to email your office manager to set up a production meeting there. Okay.
It's the greatest single dish on earth. Now, tell me, has Mum obviously can't come out and see you at the moment,
Mm.
but as soon as the borders drop, you're going to go up and see Mum, or is Mum going to come and see you?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go and see her, and yeah, probably
It's,
she will come and see me as well, because yeah.
is now COVID in your day-to-day work? There's obviously there's issues of drugs, alcohol, other substances, gambling. What have you seen an increase in social work issues
Mm.
since COVID? How else has COVID manifested itself with your clients?
I would say mental health is the number one, because people don't feel connected and can't. C- Also because I work with a lot of, like I said, families with young children and teenagers as well, with a lot of existing issues in terms of relationships in the families already. And with COVID doesn't help at all, and if anything, it makes it worse because we've seen teenagers that the number of drops out from school um, at teenagers because they don't go to school, they don't feel connected to people. Um, Added with a couple of like social isolation, existing mental health, and you have a teenager refusing to attend school online and doesn't want to go back to school after COVID. And with that, you have parents' anxiety rising, and there's the cultural differences between the first generation migrants, second generation migrants, and how a lot of first generation wanted a different life for their children, and they picture so much. And we're talking about not migrants but also refugees that been through a lot to be where they are now, and that they picture a very different life, and what they're going through now is grieving for the life that they they're not having, and they thought that they were able they were in a building it, and it's not coming true. So there's a lot of mental health issues, lots of loss and grief, um, lots of cultural differences between generations. Um, yeah, and housing and other issues are always there. And
What would you say to people listening to the podcast here,
mm,
back in Vietnam, or anywhere for that matter,
mm,
about social work? How would you would you do it again? And if you did it again, tell people what they need to look out for in studying social work and practicing as a social worker, because a lot of people, this has been very revealing podcast. What do they need to be prepared for while this? How does study set them up, and how do work placement set them up, and do they make for an effective transition to the real life of social work?
Mm. I think the social work programs here in Australia, in universities in Australia, are pretty good because it has the aspect, the theoretical unit, and it also have the practical unit, and it would well, I guess depending on universities, but majority of universities would help you to find a placement agencies, and you have to complete 1,000 hours of placement for the 2 years of my master degree.
Wow,
And yeah, so it would be
that's a
like
lot.
500 hours for each year, and that would come to 3 months
That's a lot.
of placement every year. So you would learn a lot. You would get a lot of hands-on experience, and I think some people prefer like a practical placement over a research placement, but I would definitely encourage you to enjoy your research placement as well, because research is now becoming a very wanted experience in the social work field and in the medical field as well. They're moving to evidence-based practice a lot. So all of the workplace would require you to have a research skills and experience. And in terms of work, I would definitely encourage you to go for any job that you can find after graduating. I know that a lot of graduates would have like a set of, I would say, try not to be fixated, because I know some people would have this idea of like working in this specific field, but as a graduate, I don't think we can afford to be picky, and I think as long as you can get your foot in the door and get some experience, you would then be able to go into branch into different fields, but just try to be more open-minded and flexible when you come out of uni, and just I guess just have an open mind that any experience would count, and experience in social work is normally would be very transferable, so you can use it in any field.
A lot of accounting students want to work in the top 4 accounting firms. Is the Department of Human Services the equivalent of the big one? Is it the Department of Human Services a big employer of social work graduates, or do you have to come in with experience to be employed by DHS?
I'm not 100% sure about the whether it is like in terms of accounting. I don't know how DHHS or DHS is in accounting, but in terms of social work, my current program, I'm funded by Department of, well, it used to be DHHS, but now they changed it to DFFH, which is Department of
Family and Human Services.
Family, yeah, and
that
finance
and that I think the way it works now is that most of the funding comes out of the central department, but the actual workers are either in NGOs or in local government, because everybody has swallowed the big government is bad mantra. So you still have a big government in terms of paying for all the employees, but they're all spread out in different bodies. So which makes a lot of sense because it's decentralized and you are out where the clients are. So,
A lot of NGO and non-profit organization, the funding come through DHHS or DHS.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Showing my age, when I was a criminal lawyer, I used to deal directly with DHS all the time. It's good that it's decentralized in that sense. In terms of movement, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I think for now I do wanted to stay where I am, just because I wanted to get the experience in this particular field. And I want, yeah, like I said before, I do wanted to work in structural um, social work, and I have to do with like advocacy and research and policy a little bit more. But my professor at university advised me that I should have like experience from the ground first, to go out, because we have enough policymakers that are so out of touch with people down there. Yeah, so I wanted to stay where I am, and maybe in 5 years move on to the next to another field. And I do want it to go back to the asylum seekers field as well. I really do want it to go back there, and in a better program, and can help these vulnerable groups of clients.
Last question from me, V. You've got a bachelor's in business and marketing. How have those skills assisted you in your social work?
Not much, to be honest, but I have to say, business taught me to be, I guess, like process driven, and I think I have better IT skills compared to a lot of my colleagues, and understand the process more, understand the the database more. So a lot of like technical skills, and also I have some background knowledge about how businesses run as well, and that applies to private businesses and also non-profit businesses or local government. So that's something that's helpful, because I get to understand more about the decision-making process of companies and agencies.
Great answer. Grant.
V, I don't really have a final question, but I want to bring our conversation back to the migration path. So, between the two of you, can we step out what your pathway was every step of the way? You came as a
Student on a 500 visa?
So as a tertiary student, or did you do any secondary study here?
Tertiary.
Okay.
Are you at La Trobe for your 3-year degree?
Yeah.
Then you did the 485?
Yeah.
Then you did another student visa for your master's?
Mm-hmm.
And then came the 190?
Yeah.
And people like to do their own tax and their own conveyance and their own migration. Now, if they mess it up, it's catastrophic. You realised that you were onto something with social work at master's degree and work experience. What would you say to anyone thinking about doing their own migration for state sponsorship and the actual visa itself? What would you warn them about?
I think I've got a lot of questions from people, because I posted my residency grant in like a skill migration group, and I've got a lot of people asking me questions, and I always said to them that I did it myself, because I've got some work experience in migration, and I was able, and I guess like that the research skills help as well. I did a lot of research, and I am confident that I understand inside out how migration, well, not migration, but skilled migration works. Because with other visas, I'm not that confident, but with skilled migration, I'm quite confident in terms of the process. But I understand if, and I think, I personally think that the the state website as well as the federal government website um, is quite straightforward and quite easy to understand. But that's just me, and I know that with people who might not have the experience that I had, it might be alien language to them. And I always tell them that try to like assess your confidence and your knowledge and your skills in terms of researching these. And if you don't feel confident enough and you don't feel that you have enough time, um, and you wouldn't be able to put a lot of effort into doing it by yourself, then go to a migration agent, because they are experts in this. But also I always um, encourage them to just read about it first, to have some basic knowledge um, about the visa or the program that they planning to apply for. Because I see a lot of like dodgy migration agents out there. Yeah, and I just wanted people to have all the information that they need to make an informed decision, especially when it costs a lot of money. These visa, yeah.
Now, David, you really need to have a right of reply there, even though I know V wasn't speaking about you. But when V went,
V's very switched on.
well,
V's done the state process, and the state process is quite complex, and that's why I'm so excited that she's done it and she's succeeded. The story with skilled migration, V's very fortunate because she's created her own luck, and she's wanted to be a social worker since she was a younger girl. Now, as a young Vietnamese Australian woman, she's living the dream. But not everybody gets it right, do they? I mean, you posted on a social group, and you've been beset with questions. Are those questions about people who want to do the process or have failed in the process?
People who are doing social work, people who are about to graduate, people who are in New South Wales, then they got social work taken off the list, and they asked me if it's worth it to go to Victoria and things like that. And so I was like, this is very out of my scope of knowledge, and I really do encourage you to go to speak with a migration agent. And also, there's a lot of luck. I've got a lot of luck in the process as well, because things change. This is not the pathway that I plan to go for, but it just happened that way, and I just grabbed the opportunities, and
But I would say you created your own luck as well by working extremely hard with your English and getting Vietnamese credential community language, which has put you 10 points ahead of other people doing social work. And so you've created your own luck.
And we haven't covered sort of your employment history, V, but I'm guessing that you have worked for several employers from the time you first came to Australia, and that you have a fairly wide experience of different types of workplaces. And I hope I'm right in that assumption. And that leads me to sort of say it's like networking. We always bang on about making connections and expanding your professional network and your social network as much as you can, because everything you can pick up about Australia, everything that you can absorb, will help you anytime you have to make an application to a government body or a large employer, because you can't help but reflect your experiences, what you know, It's
Yeah.
you don't have to pretend that you know things that you don't know.
Yeah.
I, so I'm just guessing that you've had more than two or employers or three employers, and that you've done more than work in retail and then on your professional practice. I think it just you just seem to me to be someone who has been here longer than you actually have, and that's what
Definitely.
happens.
And I'll give you a prime example. So I knew David when I was working in the Vietnamese Association group in La
La
Trobe
Visa. La Visa.
for international students. So that's where I knew David from. And David has been a friend and a migration agent at times as well. I came to him for a lot of advices in regard to migration, and I learned a lot from him. And I still remember, David, you wrote me like a referral letter for after I graduated my business degree. And yeah, so you learn a lot from your network. Certainly, definitely, especially for international students.
And V, when you said there are a lot of dodgy migration agents out there, we just better be clear. You weren't talking about David.
No, she mentioned agents. I'm a lawyer. I'm an immigration lawyer, so we're different.
Well,
we're very different.
That's what I wanted to point out. That anyone who from this day on tells you they're a migration agent is dodgy, because there are no migration agents now. I wonder, were you interchanging migration with education when you were talking about the agents? Because as David often references, and I don't disagree with him about, there's some very dodgy practices in education agents.
Naughty.
Yeah.
But you're living the Australian dream, but the best is yet to come, because in 1 year's time, you know what you become. You make application to become an Australian citizen.
Yeah.
You're definitely going to be an Australian citizen?
Yeah.
Very
for the sake
good
of
to
voting.
Now, we won't ask we won't ask who you'll vote for, because we'll get in trouble, all of us. But it's the ultimate prize. As a Vietnamese, dual citizenship is allowed in Vietnamese law and Australian law, and it'll be the end of a remarkable journey and the end of a remarkable podcast, because you've been fantastic. You've been fantastic. Now go and have a lovely Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
And we will talk to you. Let's talk again when you become a citizen.
Yes, sure.
Let's do a live broadcast from the citizenship ceremony, David.
Actually, Grant, have you ever been to this? Or V, have you ever been to the ceremonies before?
No.
They're beautiful. They're beautiful.
Oh, V's disappeared.
We've lost V. We've lost
no.
V. If you're there, thank you for coming on the Migrating to Australia podcast. You've been fantastic.
I don't know what you said, David.
Well, we were getting to the crescendo, the high point, Australian citizenship, and under Vietnamese law, V can become an Australian citizen. Under Australian law, V can become an Australian citizen. Those who listen, or those who haven't listened before, countries like Singapore and Malaysia, Japan, South Korea don't allow dual citizenship. Countries like Germany and South Africa do allow dual citizenship with permission. Grant, how many South Africans do you think have sought permission from their government to get Australian citizenship? Not many.
Oh, I don't know. I just think that they just arrive here in Perth, don't they? They just arrive in Perth, and
Perth's very popular for South Africans. Absolutely, yeah.
Because that's where.
I haven't been to Perth for about 30 years. Have you been to Perth?
It's a long time since I've been to Perth. I haven't been to their new football ground. But anyway, David, that's probably a good time for us to wrap up the show, and we can talk about the Perth football ground when we don't have a wider audience. Everyone, thanks very much. Check out David on Twitter at David Bongiorno, or Instagram at David_A_C_Bongiorno. And
what about if people want to get a podcast running? How do they get in touch with you, Grant?
Oh, the best way to get hold of me is through the Migrating to Australia podcast.com website, which is looking pretty all right. So yeah, you can just contact me through that, Grant at Migrating to Australia podcast.com. Always happy to talk about getting more people with podcasts going, getting their voices out there. If you've got something to say, talk to me. Bye, David.
Ciao, mate. Have a good week.
Bye, everybody.